They laughed when I cried. They whispered when I broke. They thought my silence meant I gave up. But silence was never surrender. It was preparation. And by the time they realized what I had become, it was already too late for all of them. Before I tell you everything, I need you to do one thing right now. If you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed to the floor by someone who thought you would stay there, subscribe to this channel, because this story was made for you. And trust me, you will want to stay until the very end, because the twist that comes later, nobody saw it coming, not even me. I grew up in a town where the roads were dusty and the silence was loud. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the kind that sits heavy on your chest when there is not enough food on the table and your mother is too tired to pretend everything is fine. That was my childhood. That was our life. My mother Rosalie and me, after my father Aldrich walked out and chose a different world, a richer one that had no room for us. My mother was a seamstress. She stitched other people's clothes from before sunrise until her fingers ached at night. She never complained, not once. She would hum old songs while she worked, low and steady, like the melody was the only thing holding her together. I used to sit on the floor beside her feet and watch her hands move and think, how does she do it? How does she keep going when everything keeps breaking? I did not understand it then. I understand it now. Aldrich did not just leave us with grief. He left us with debt, with whispers, and with the quiet shame that a small town never lets you forget. People saw us and looked away just a little too fast. Children at school repeated things their parents said at dinner. I learned very early that poverty is not just about money. It is about how people look at you, or how they stop looking altogether. But I was sharp. Even then, I was sharp. I read everything I could find. I borrowed books from the town library until the librarian knew my name without looking up. I wrote essays late at night by the light of a small lamp while my mother slept. And when I was 14 years old, I wrote something that changed everything, or so I believed. There was a regional scholarship competition. The prize was a full scholarship to a prestigious boarding school far from our town, far from the dust and the whispers and the weight of being Rosalie's poor daughter. I poured every honest word I had into that essay. I wrote about my mother's hands. I wrote about what it felt like to want a future so badly that it physically hurt. I won. The judges said my essay was unlike anything they had ever read. And then, nothing. Weeks passed. I heard nothing. My mother called the competition office. They told her the scholarship had been awarded to another student, that there must have been some confusion, that perhaps I had misunderstood the results. I had not misunderstood anything. I cried for 3 days. I mean the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep it doesn't even make sound at first, just shaken, just loss. My mother held me on the second night and stroked my hair and said something I have carried with me every single day since. She said, "Dry your eyes, my love. Crying is not weakness, it is fuel. Save it." I did not know then what had really happened to my scholarship. I would not find out for 6 more years. But the night my mother said those words to me, something shifted. I stopped crying, and I went very, very quiet. That silence was the beginning of everything. I put myself through university. That sentence sounds simple. It was not simple. It was 3 jobs, 4 walls, 2 meals a day, and 0 complaints. I studied agricultural law and land rights, a field that most people found dry and complicated. I found it fascinating, because land is never just land. Land is power. Land is history. Land is what people steal from the weak when they think no one is paying attention. I was paying attention. I was invisible in those years, and I chose to be. No noise, no drama, just purpose. While other students celebrated and socialized, I was in the library at midnight with case files and highlighters and cold coffee. People assumed I was boring, unremarkable. Fine, Let them think that. Unremarkable people are never watched, and I needed to move without being watched. It was during my second year that I met Professor Odell. He was a retired land rights attorney who taught one evening seminar per semester, almost as a favor to the department. He was old and quiet and precise in a way that felt almost military. Most students found him intimidating. I found him in the hallway after class one evening and asked him a question about a land seizure from 30 years ago that no one else in the room had even noticed. He stopped walking. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Come to my office Thursday. Bring that question and 2 more like it." That was how it started. He became my mentor without ever officially calling himself that. He pushed me harder than anyone. He never praised me easily, and he never, not once, told me everything he knew about why he cared so deeply about land rights cases in our region. I would only understand that later, much later, when it was almost over. I also met Benedict during those years. He was steady and warm, and he loved me in the quietest, most consistent way I had ever experienced. He never asked me why I worked so hard. He never told me to slow down. He simply made sure there was always a warm meal and an open door. In a life built on concrete and stone, Benedict was the only soft thing, and I held on to him carefully. But underneath the study and the routine and the warmth of Benedict's presence, I was building something. Because in my 3rd year, buried inside a stack of regional land dispute archives, I found it. A pattern, a deliberate, decades-long pattern of farming land being seized from poor families through forged documentation, bribed local officials, and legal manipulation so sophisticated that most people never even realized what had been taken from them. And at the center of that pattern was one name, one family. Dorothea's family. The same Dorothea who had taken my father, the same family whose influence had quietly, deliberately stolen my scholarship and given it to one of their own. I sat with that archive folder in my hands for a very long time. My heart was not racing, my hands were not shaking. I was calm, because this was not a surprise, this was confirmation. And confirmation is just the moment when preparation becomes purpose. I said nothing to anyone. I began building the case. Then something happened that I did not expect. Colt, Dorothea's son, found me. Not because he knew who I was. He did not know. To him, I was simply a young attorney he had met at a regional agricultural conference. He was charming in that effortless way that people raised with money often are. He smiled like the world owed him its warmth, and the world usually agreed. He pursued me, persistently, and I let him get close, not out of cruelty, but because proximity is information. The closer he got, the more I understood how Dorothea's world operated from the inside. And then one evening, during a careless conversation over dinner, Colt mentioned the scholarship, casually, like it was a small, amusing story from his teenage years. He said his mother had rerouted a competition result once to help a family friend. He laughed a little, said something like, "That's just how things worked back then." He had no idea he was sitting across the table from the girl whose future his mother had stolen. I smiled. I picked up my glass, and I filed it away in that cold, quiet place inside me where I kept everything important. Colt proposed to me in front of 100 people 8 months later, and I smiled, because by that point I had already started dismantling everything his family owned, brick by brick, document by document, in absolute silence. I filed the case on a Tuesday morning. No press release, no announcement, just a quiet legal filing on behalf of 11 farming families, all of whom had lost land to Dorothea's family over the span of 30 years. 11 families,
elderly farmers, widows, sons of men who had died never knowing their land had been stolen and not merely lost. The town found out the way small towns always find out, through whispers that moved faster than wind, and the reaction was exactly what I expected. Disbelief, then amusement, then the particular kind of contempt that powerful people reserve for those they consider beneath them. Dorothea's response was a laugh, a genuine, unhurried laugh. She hired the most expensive legal team in the region and told her circle that some poor girl was playing lawyer. She said it would be finished in a week. She did not bother to find out my name for the first 2 hearings. That detail told me everything I needed to know about how confident she was, and confidence, in my experience, is where the careless make their home. I made no statements to the press. I attended every hearing in plain clothes with a single worn leather briefcase that had belonged to Professor Odell. I spoke only when the law required me to speak, and I watched Dorothea's legal team perform, polished and loud and absolutely certain they were untouchable. Then the evidence began to surface. Forged land deeds, financial records connecting Dorothea's family to officials who had long since retired but not disappeared. A paper trail so long and so deliberate that the courtroom grew quieter with each new document. Quieter in that way that means something has shifted, that people are no longer watching a show, they are watching the truth.
Professor Odell testified. He was composed and precise and devastating. Every word he spoke was measured and clean. He had spent 30 years organizing what he knew, and now in that courtroom it all came out, documented, verified, irrefutable. The 11 families testified one by one. An old farmer who had lost land his grandfather cleared with his own hands. A widow who had spent decades believing her husband had simply failed. A middle-aged man who broke down twice on the stand, talking about his father. The courtroom wept. I did not weep, not yet. And then I presented the document that no one expected. A letter, handwritten, signed, by Aldrich, my father. In the letter, written 15 years earlier during a private dispute that never went public, Aldrich confessed his role in helping Dorothea's family falsify the original land documents for their first major acquisition. He had done it in exchange for money, for his new life, for everything he chose over us. The courtroom went absolutely silent. I stood there and I felt something crack open inside me that I had kept sealed for a very long time. Not rage, something older than rage, something that lives in the place between grief and understanding. I was the one who had found that letter in the archive. I was the one who had chosen to use it, and I knew what it meant. It meant that the man who left us with nothing had helped build the foundation of the very thing that kept us in nothing. I wiped one tear, just one, and I continued. That night, a car came to my home. A man I did not recognize handed me an envelope without saying a word. Inside was a check, an enormous check, enough money to change my mother's life completely. At the bottom, in Dorothea's handwriting, were 4 words, "Make this go away." I held that check for a long moment. I thought about my mother's hands. I thought about 3 days of crying when I was 14. I thought about 11 families sitting in a courtroom with their grief finally witnessed. I lit the check on fire over my kitchen sink. I placed the ashes in a clean envelope and I sent it back. The court ruled in favor of all 11 families. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, because after everything, after years of silence and work and sacrifice, and the kind of loneliness that comes from carrying a secret that heavy, those 9 words were the most powerful I had ever heard. Dorothea's estate was ordered to return the seized land and pay decades of damages. The paper trail led to 3 local officials who were subsequently removed from their positions.
Her carefully constructed world, built on forged paper and borrowed authority, collapsed in public, in daylight, with the whole town watching. Colt came to the courthouse steps when it was over. He looked like someone had removed something essential from inside him. He stood in front of me and said, "You used me." I looked at him for a moment, and then I said, "No, I ignored you. There is a difference," and I walked past him without looking back. Aldrich came to my door 3 days after the ruling. He was old now, small in a way that had nothing to do with his height. He stood on my step and tried to explain. He built sentences that fell apart before they finished. He used the word sorry in several different arrangements, as if rearranging it might make it land differently. I let him finish, and then I said, "You built their world on our suffering. I rebuilt ours on your wreckage. We are even." I closed the door, quietly, no slam, just the soft, final click of something that no longer needed to be open. But the moment that undid me completely, the twist I never saw coming, came from Professor Odell. After the ruling, he called me to his office one last time. He sat across from me, and he placed an old folder on the desk between us. Inside was a case filing from 30 years ago, a land rights case against Dorothea's family, filed by a young attorney who had gathered evidence, built a solid case, and been professionally destroyed before it ever reached a courtroom. His license had been challenged, his reputation dismantled. He had been forced out of practice entirely. That attorney was Professor Odell. He had never told me, not once in all our years of working together, had he mentioned that he had tried to fight this battle before me. He had let me find my own way. He had let me build my own case from the ground up, carrying none of his wounds, none of his history. He had guided me without directing me, and in doing so, he had made sure that the moment finally came, it was clean, it was mine, and it would hold. I sat across from him, and I could not speak for a long time. Finally, I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at me with that quiet, precise way of his and said, "Because I didn't want you carrying my war. I wanted you to fight your own. You did, and in doing so, you finished mine." I cried in his office, not the kind of crying that breaks you, the kind that releases you, the kind my mother told me to save. My mother, Rosalie, recovered. The settlement provided enough to cover her medical care and more. The first time she slept through an entire night without pain, I sat beside her bed in the dark and just listened to her breathe, easy, steady, like someone had finally set down a weight she had been carrying for 30 years. We went back to the land that belonged to my grandfather. Standing at the edge of that field for the first time, with Benedict beside me and the sun coming up slow and gold over the ridge, I understood something I had spent years working towards, but never fully felt until that moment. This was not revenge. This was restoration. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. Together with the 11 families, we built a cooperative farm on the reclaimed land. Not a monument, not a symbol, a working, living thing, crops and community and shared labor and shared harvest, the kind of thing that grows stronger the more hands are in it. I narrate this story to you now, not from anger, not from bitterness, but from the other side of it, where the air is cleaner and the ground under your feet is yours. They thought tears meant I was finished, but every tear I cried watered something inside me they could not see and could not reach. And my silence was never emptiness, it was architecture. I was building something in the dark that could only stand in the light. They made me cry. I let them, because I knew something they didn't. The ones who survive the silence always outlast the noise.